The Great Pyramid feels young compared to the stones of Malta. These megalithic temples are not just ancient, they are foundational, built over 1,000 years before the pharaohs even rose to power. By the end of this journey, you will see human history in an entirely new light. We will meet the mysterious people who built these colossal structures without metal or the wheel, decode the celestial alignments etched into their design, and confront the haunting mystery of their sudden disappearance. This is the story of a forgotten civilization whose silent stones ask profound questions about who we are and where we come from. What does true innovation look like when stripped of everything we call modern? To grasp the magnitude of their achievement, we need to step into their world. Around 3600 BCE, the islands of Malta and Gozo were not a remote backwater, but a vibrant center of something new. Across the wider Mediterranean, societies were beginning to experiment with farming and settled life, but here, something extraordinary took root. While many in Europe still lived in mobile groups, following herds and seasons, the people of these islands had already chosen a different path. They had become a cohesive, settled society, one that cultivated the land and looked out across the sea. They possessed no bronze or iron. Their tools were made of stone, bone, and wood. They had no knowledge of the wheel to move their massive building blocks, and curiously, archaeologists find little evidence of the organized conflict or defensive structures that mark so many other ancient cultures. Their obsession was not with fortifications, but with something far more profound. They channeled their collective energy, their ingenuity, and likely generations of labor into a single, stunning purpose: the construction of monumental sacred spaces. This was a peaceful revolution in stone, a cultural flowering so intense it seems to have consumed their entire identity. The Mediterranean served as a connective sea, a slow-moving network where ideas about farming, pottery, and ritual could travel. But what the Maltese did with those ideas was utterly unique. They didn't just adopt a new style, they invented one. Their temples are not copies of something found elsewhere. They are a declaration, a physical manifestation of a belief system so powerful it demanded permanent, awe-inspiring architecture. Understanding this context, this quiet, focused society without the tools we assume are necessary for greatness, makes the stones we are about to encounter not just old, but almost impossible. These colossal stones rise from the island of Gozo like the bones of the earth. The Ġgantija above Ġgantija temples, the Giant's Tower, are a declaration in limestone. Their outer walls are built from slabs so immense, some exceeding 50 tons, that later cultures could only explain them as the work of giants. To stand before them is to feel a shift in scale, not just of size, but of human ambition. These are not just old stones, they are among the very first attempts by humanity to build something permanent and sacred from the ground up, freestanding architecture that predates even the great circles of Stonehenge by well over 1,000 years. The complex unfolds as two adjacent temples, nestled together within a single, gigantic boundary wall, each following a unique cloverleaf floor plan. Their walls curve inward, creating a series of rounded chambers that feel organic, almost like they were grown rather than built. This design is a signature of the Maltese builders, an architectural language found nowhere else in the world at this time. But the overwhelming question, the one that hangs in the air as palpably as the Mediterranean sun, is how. How did a people using flint, chert, and wooden wedges manage to carve these monoliths from the island's bedrock? How did they move them without wheels or draft animals across miles of rugged terrain? And how did they then lift them, slotting each multi-ton block into place with a precision that has endured for millennia? The logistics are staggering, pointing not to a simple farming village, but to a society of astonishing unity and purpose. This was a project that would have demanded generations of coordinated labor, a shared vision so powerful it could move mountains, or at least pieces of them. The sheer effort implies a social structure capable of organizing hundreds, perhaps thousands of people, not for defense or conquest, but for creation. Ġgantija is not merely a temple, it is the physical evidence of a collective dream, a testament to what can be achieved when an entire culture pulls in the same direction. What kind of belief, what understanding of the universe could possibly justify such an immense and sustained investment? Yet the genius of these builders is revealed not in the size of the stones alone, but in the quiet sophistication of their assembly. This was far more than simple stacking. Look closely at the remains of the ceilings, and you will see the beginnings of a revolutionary architectural idea, corbelling. This technique involves laying each new course of stone slightly inward over the one below, stepping the walls gradually toward a central point to create a domed roof. It is a principle of stability and space-making that would not appear in the grand tombs of Mycenae for another 1,000 years. Here in Malta, it was already ancient practice. The walls themselves are marvels of early engineering, often constructed with a double skin, an inner core of rubble and earth for stability, faced with those meticulously fitted megalithic slabs we see from the outside. This was a deliberate design for endurance, a buffer against time and the elements, but perhaps the most telling clues to their methods are the small, spherical stone balls found scattered around the sites. These are not ornaments, but likely components of a brilliant transport system. Researchers suggest these spheres acted as bearings or rollers, placed beneath wooden sledges or carts to reduce friction, allowing teams to pivot and guide multi-ton blocks across the landscape with a degree of control we rarely grant these ancient people. Each of these details, the corbelled arch, the composite wall, the ingenious bearings, speaks of something profound, not a sudden flash of inspiration, but generations of accumulated knowledge. This was a living tradition of building, refined and passed down over centuries. Every temple was an iteration, an improvement on the last, a collective intelligence carved in limestone. Such sustained, refined effort forces a question: what belief, what cosmic understanding was so important that it demanded not just a monument, but an ever-evolving masterpiece of stone designed to last for eternity? But the true heart of this civilization may not lie in the sun-baked stones above, but in the profound silence below. In 1902, workers in the town of Paula were digging a cistern for a new housing development when their tools broke through into an unexpected void. Instead of solid rock, they found an opening into a vast man-made darkness, a labyrinth descending 3 full stories into the earth. This was the Hypogeum of Halsaflieni, an underground temple of the dead that mirrors the world above in chillingly perfect detail. To descend its modern stairway is to leave the present behind entirely, entering a space where the boundary between architecture and geology completely dissolves. Every surface, every archway, every rounded chamber has been painstakingly excavated from the Globigerina limestone, a soft stone that hardens on contact with air. The builders didn't construct this place, they sculpted it from the inside out, a negative image of their towering temples. Here, deep beneath the ground, you find perfect replicas of the surface world's architectural language: trilithon doorways, corbelled ceilings that mimic stone roofs, even painted spirals in red ochre that once adorned the walls. It is as if they carved a sacred blueprint directly into the earth itself, creating a permanent, inverted home for something they held most dear. This multi-level complex was a collective resting place where the remains of thousands of individuals were carefully placed over centuries. Researchers note the bones were often arranged with clear intention, grouped and sorted in ways that suggest deep ceremonial practice and a belief in a community that extended beyond a single lifetime. The scale is almost incomprehensible, a subterranean city of the departed that required generations to complete, expanding downward as the need for space grew. But within this silent stone city, one room holds a mystery that transcends even its funerary purpose. It is known as the Oracle Room, a small, oval chamber with a peculiar property. A low voice spoken from a specific niche does not simply echo. It resonates, amplifying and distorting into a deep, pervasive hum that seems to vibrate through the stone floor and into your very bones. This is not a random acoustic fluke. Modern analysis suggests the room is tuned to a specific resonant frequency, one that can physically affect human perception. In the flickering light of oil lamps, such a sound would have been transformative, potentially altering states of consciousness, making the very air feel alive with presence. This points to a sophisticated, intentional use of sound as a sacred technology, a tool to bridge worlds. The Hypogeum, therefore, was far more than a tomb. It was the dark counterpart to the sunlit temples, a complete sacred geography crafted by a people who saw no firm line between life and what comes after. In this echoing darkness, they built a permanent portal, using architecture, ritual, and even the physics of sound to maintain a conversation with the unseen. The southern coast of Malta offers a different kind of temple, one that speaks not to the earth or the underworld, but directly to the sky. Here, the complexes of Hagar and Mnajdra perch on a windswept plateau overlooking the Mediterranean, their stones bearing witness to a sophisticated dialogue with the sun itself. The two sites, built within sight of each other, reveal a fascinating contrast. Hagar, constructed from the softer Globigerina limestone, has been sculpted by millennia of sea winds and rain into surreal, almost melted forms, a testament to the relentless passage of time. Just a short walk away, Mnajdra, built from the much harder coralline limestone, stands in remarkable preservation, its walls and doorways sharply defined against the blue horizon. This choice of materials was not accidental. It was a deliberate architectural decision, suggesting the builders understood the properties of their local stone and assigned purpose accordingly. But the true purpose of Mnajdra, particularly its lower temple, unlocks a stunning dimension of this civilization's intellect. This smaller, more intimate temple is a masterpiece of celestial engineering. Its entrance and internal passages are aligned with such precision that they function as a sophisticated solar calendar. On the mornings of the spring and autumn equinoxes, a single, narrow beam of sunlight pierces the main doorway, traveling across the stone floor to strike a specific marker slab with unerring accuracy. The effect is even more dramatic during the solstices. At the summer solstice, the sun's first rays illuminate the edge of a large stone slab to the right of the doorway, while at the winter solstice, the light shifts to illuminate a corresponding slab on the left. This is not a vague alignment or a happy coincidence. It is a repeatable, predictable phenomenon built into the very fabric of the structure. The renowned archaeologist J.D. Evans described it as nothing less than a Stone Age calendar, a permanent clockwork of light and shadow etched in megaliths. To achieve this, the builders needed more than just devotion. They required generations of meticulous observation. They had to track the sun's slow, year-long journey across the horizon, noting its northernmost and southernmost risings with painstaking care, and then translate that cosmic data into immutable architecture. This implies a specialized class of individuals within their society, a priestly order of astronomer builders who held the crucial knowledge of the seasons. Their influence would have been immense. By predicting the equinoxes and solstices, they didn't just mark time, they commanded it. They could announce the optimal moments for planting and harvest, regulate the timing of major ceremonies, and anchor their entire ritual and agricultural calendar to the reliable rhythm of the heavens. This solar alignment transforms our view of these temples from purely spiritual monuments into integrated centers of knowledge, where faith, science, and survival were seamlessly woven together. The stones of Mnajdra are a silent observatory, proving that 5,000 years ago, on these isolated islands, humanity was already measuring the universe, using the sun's light to write its laws directly onto the earth. This artistic explosion reached its peak at the Tarxien temples. If the earlier sites demonstrate a mastery of form and alignment, Tarxien reveals a civilization now obsessed with ornamentation, with covering every available surface in a language of symbols. This complex, built and expanded over many centuries, is where the temple period's spiritual vision found its most eloquent and elaborate voice. The massive stones here are not merely walls, they are tapestries in limestone. The most pervasive motif is the spiral, carved with fluid, confident lines, sometimes single, sometimes interlocking in dizzying, hypnotic patterns. These spirals are not random decoration, they pulse with a sense of movement and energy, perhaps representing water, growth, the cyclical nature of life, or even a journey into another state of being. Alongside these abstract patterns, the Tarxian artists depicted the living world with startling naturalism. Reliefs of animals emerge from the stone, not as wild beasts to be feared, but as familiar, vital parts of the community. We see bulls, goats, sheep, and pigs, all creatures central to a pastoral society, forever memorialized in the sacred space. This connection suggests these animals held a significance far beyond food. They were likely integral to the community's identity and spiritual practices, perhaps seen as embodiments of vitality and provision. The most dramatic discovery, however, was a fragment of a colossal statue. Only the lower portion survived, a pair of massive, pillar-like legs and a skirt carved from a single block. Based on its scale, the complete figure would have stood nearly 3 meters tall. Most researchers interpret this as a representation of a mother goddess, a monumental symbol of fertility, abundance, and the generative power of the earth. Her presence would have dominated the temple interior, a tangible, awe-inspiring focus for worship. The rituals performed before her are hinted at by other finds, altars with sharp flint knives still in place, and curious curved channels cut into the floor, possibly designed to channel liquid offerings like water, blood, or milk in a carefully orchestrated ceremony. Every detail at Tarxien speaks of a mature, confident society that had developed a full and complex symbolic language. They were no longer just building spaces for ritual, they were meticulously crafting the entire sensory experience of belief, from the towering presence of the goddess to the intricate carvings that surrounded her, and the precise actions of the ceremonies at her feet. This was a culture communicating its deepest understandings of the world, of life, death, and renewal, not with words but with art carved in stone for eternity. Yet this magnificent flowering at Tarxien presents us with a profound and unsettling puzzle, for it represents not just the peak of their achievement, but the very edge of their existence. The artistic energy on display here is so vibrant, so assured, that its sudden end becomes one of the greatest mysteries in archaeology. The vibrant artistry of Tarxien marks a high point of a civilization that has, until now, remained completely silent. We have walked through their temples, traced their solar alignments, and felt the resonance of their underground chambers, yet the people themselves have been phantoms, defined only by the staggering works they left behind. Who were these silent builders? Without a single written word, their identity is a puzzle assembled from fragments of bone, seed, and stone. Analysis of skeletal remains from their resting places paints a physical portrait. They were a people of modest stature but robust build, likely descended from the earliest Neolithic farmers who journeyed from nearby Sicily centuries before. They were not just builders, but deeply skilled agriculturalists, cultivating wheat and barley in the island's thin soil and herding sheep, goats, and the pigs we saw immortalized in their carvings. Their society was rooted in the land and the sea that surrounded them, but one of the most telling absences in the archaeological record is the lack of weapons. From their golden age spanning more than 1,000 years, researchers find no fortified settlements, no caches of spears or daggers designed for warfare. This stands in stark contrast to nearly every other contemporary culture. It suggests a social order of remarkable cohesion, one where authority likely flowed from spiritual knowledge rather than martial force. The sheer scale of their temple projects, requiring generations of coordinated labor, points to a theocratic society, a peaceful kingdom where priest astronomers could command the workforce of an entire island to fulfill a sacred vision. This makes their ultimate fate all the more jarring. Around 2500 BC, the hammering of stone stopped. The temples were not violently destroyed, but slowly abandoned. The complex culture that had sustained itself for over a millennium simply faded away, leaving its magnificent structures to the wind. What could cause such a profound and quiet collapse? Theories point to a slow unraveling. A changing climate may have brought prolonged drought, straining their fragile agricultural system. Some researchers suggest the very success of their society led to overpopulation and the overexploitation of the limited local resources like timber and fertile soil. It is possible their peaceful structure, so effective for construction, left them vulnerable to internal strife or unable to adapt to a new kind of pressure. Their disappearance is a haunting echo, a reminder that even the most stable and creative civilizations exist in a delicate balance with their world. The silence that followed their departure is almost as profound as the silence from which they first emerged. These silent stone figures hold the key to understanding a world without words. Among the most captivating discoveries across the temples are the numerous figurines, carved from stone or molded from clay, that seem to embody the very soul of this civilization. The most famous is the so-called Sleeping Lady, found deep within the Hypogeum. She reclines on a woven couch, her form full and rounded, her expression one of peaceful repose. She is not depicted in action, but in a state of tranquil rest, which has led many to see her as a symbol of eternal sleep, a guardian of the sacred space of the departed. Alongside her are countless other female figures, often seated or standing, with exaggerated hips and breasts, their forms speaking a universal language of fertility and abundance. For decades, scholars like Mnajdra Gimbutas pointed to this overwhelming artistic focus as evidence of a society governed by a matriarchal religion, a culture that worshipped a supreme mother goddess. In this interpretation, the goddess represented the entire cycle of existence, the source of life, the sustainer of the community, and the receiver of the dead back into the earth. The notable absence of imagery celebrating male warriors or rulers seemed to support this view, suggesting a social order that valued generative and nurturing principles over those of conquest and hierarchy. The temples themselves, with their curved, womb-like chambers and life-giving solar alignments, could be seen as monumental homes for this divine feminine presence. Yet, as with all ancient mysteries, certainty remains elusive. Some contemporary researchers offer a word of caution, reminding us that our modern interpretations can sometimes project our own desires onto the past. These voluptuous figures, they suggest, might not represent a single, all-powerful deity, but could instead depict revered ancestors, powerful priestesses, or even symbolic representations of ideals like prosperity and health. They might be votive offerings left by individuals seeking blessing or giving thanks. What is undeniable, however, is the central role these figures played. They are a direct window into the spiritual psyche of the people, a tangible focus for a devotion that permeated every aspect of their existence, from the harvest celebrated at Mnajdra to the rituals conducted in the echoing dark of the Hypogeum. Whether goddess, ancestor, or guide, she was the heart around which their world turned, the silent witness to 1,000 years of prayer, offering, and community. Her enduring stone presence asks us to consider what a society looks like when it builds its greatest monuments not to the glory of kings, but to the sacred mystery of life itself. This visual language carved into the altars and walls was a sacred text without words. Among all the symbols, one motif repeats with a mesmerizing, almost hypnotic frequency: the spiral. Etched into stone with fluid, confident lines, it appears as a single coil, a double helix, or in vast, interlocking networks that seem to pulse with an invisible energy. This is not idle decoration. To encounter it in the dim, flickering light of an oil lamp during a ceremony would have been a profound experience. Scholars see in this symbol a representation of the most fundamental truths of the Neolithic world, the cyclical journey of life, death, and rebirth. It mirrors the turning seasons they tracked so precisely at Mnajdra, the growth of crops from seed to harvest, and the human journey itself. Some researchers suggest these spirals may also map an inner landscape, representing visions or altered states of consciousness induced through ritual, chanting, or the resonant acoustics of places like the oracle room. The spiral becomes a pathway, a guide for the mind traveling between worlds. Alongside these dynamic coils, other symbols hold quieter meaning. Carefully drilled holes dot the surfaces of altars and paving stones. These likely served as cups to hold liquid offerings, perhaps water, oil, or milk, libations slowly absorbed by the stone in a tangible act of communion. Other patterns resemble simple grids or checkerboards, possibly symbolic representations of the agricultural fields that sustained the community, weaving the act of farming directly into the fabric of the sacred. This entire visual system was deeply sacramental. It was designed to be read, felt, and understood by those participating in the rites, a series of visual cues that reinforced the ceremony's purpose and guided collective focus. The temples, therefore, were far more than buildings. They were carefully engineered environments for transcendental experience. Every element, from the solar light show at the Equinox to the echoing acoustics underground, and the symbols covering the walls, worked in concert. Their primary function was to facilitate a connection, to dissolve the boundary between the community and the cosmic forces they believed governed their world. In these spaces, through ritual and symbol, they didn't just pray for a good harvest, they actively participated in the renewal of the world itself. The stones were not a backdrop for their beliefs, they were an active, vibrating component of it. The silent symbols and soaring chambers present a vision of profound spirituality, but they rest upon a foundation of raw, practical genius. To translate their sacred vision into reality, the builders of Malta faced an engineering challenge of staggering proportions, one that forces us to reconsider the very definition of primitive technology. Their first task was extraction, freeing multi-ton blocks of limestone from the living bedrock. Without metal tools, they relied on a profound understanding of their material. They would identify natural fissures in the stone, then employ a method of thermal shock. Fires were built directly against the rock face, heating it intensely. At the precise moment, workers would douse the hot stone with water, causing it to crack and fracture along controlled lines. It was a delicate, dangerous operation, a dance of elemental forces mastered through generations of trial and error. Once a monolith was liberated, the even greater challenge began: moving it. The spherical stone balls found at the sites offer a crucial clue. Researchers believe these acted as bearings within a sophisticated transport system. A massive block would be levered onto a wooden sledge, and these stone spheres would be placed on a prepared track of wooden rails or compacted earth. Teams of laborers could then pull ropes, using the rollers to drastically reduce friction, allowing them to pivot and guide these immense weights across kilometers of undulating, rocky terrain. For the final act of elevation, positioning a lintel stone atop two uprights, they likely constructed earthen ramps, using gravity, leverage, and coordinated muscle to inch each piece into its final, perfect place. The sheer scale of this labor is almost beyond comprehension. A single temple complex would have required the coordinated effort of hundreds, perhaps thousands of individuals, not for a season but for generations. This implies a society of remarkable stability and surplus. To feed an army of full-time builders and engineers, the community needed a highly productive agricultural system, one that yielded more food than the farmers themselves required. This surplus allowed for specialization, freeing people from the daily work of survival to become quarrymen, transporters, master masons, and astronomer priests. Such a complex, multi-generational project could not have been managed by a loose collection of villages. It points to a strong, centralized social organization, a theocratic hierarchy where spiritual leaders possessed the authority to coordinate this colossal communal effort. The compelling vision of the Mother Goddess and the cosmic order was not just a belief, it was the engine of their society. It provided the why that made the unbearable how not only possible but essential. Their faith was the ultimate technology, the invisible force that moved mountains, one back-breaking, sacred stone at a time. The precision of these solar alignments reveals a mind at work that was both deeply spiritual and rigorously scientific. This field of study, known as astroarchaeology, examines how ancient structures encode astronomical knowledge, and the Temples of Malta are among its most compelling textbooks. Researchers like Gerald Formosa have meticulously documented the light shows at Mnajdra, where the architecture functions with the reliability of a finely tuned instrument. On the equinoxes, that slender beam of light does not simply fall anywhere. It strikes a precisely carved marker stone, a moment of perfect balance between day and night etched in light and shadow. At the solstices, the sun's first gleam illuminates the edges of specific megaliths, defining the boundaries of the solar year. This is not a vague or symbolic alignment. It is an engineering achievement of repeatable, predictable accuracy, built to last for millennia. To accomplish this, the builders needed more than faith. They required a tradition of patient, empirical observation passed down through countless generations. They had to track the sun's slow migration along the horizon year after year, noting its extreme northern and southern turning points with meticulous care, and then translate that celestial data into an unchanging plan of stone. This points to the existence of a specialized intellectual class within their peaceful society, a lineage of astronomer priests who held the vital knowledge of time itself. Their power was immense and practical. By predicting the solstices and equinoxes, they could announce the optimal windows for planting and harvest, turning their astronomical insight into the very foundation of food security and social stability. The temple became the community's calendar, its clock, and its guarantee of survival. But the purpose was undoubtedly twofold, intertwining the practical with the profoundly sacred. When that first sliver of sunlight pierced the dark temple interior on the winter solstice, the longest night of the year, it would have been a moment of collective awe and relief. It was not merely a signal for farmers, it was the visible return of a life-giving force, perhaps perceived as a deity itself, physically entering and re-sanctifying its earthly home. In that dramatic interplay of architecture and astronomy, the boundary between the cosmic and the communal dissolved. The temple was a cosmological machine, a device designed to harness the rhythm of the heavens and make it a tangible, participatory experience for every member of the culture. This celestial connection elevates our understanding of these sites from places of worship to integrated centers of universal law, where humanity first learned to read the sky and write its lessons in stone. Yet for all its celestial harmony and artistic brilliance, this civilization did not endure. Around 2500 BCE, the rhythm that had sustained the islands for over a millennium began to falter. The great building project ceased, the sacred hearths within the temples grew cold. The once bustling ritual centers were slowly, quietly abandoned, left to the encroaching soil and the whispering wind. A profound silence settled over the megaliths, a silence that would last for centuries until the arrival of new peoples, likely bearers of the Bronze Age beaker culture, who used the old temple sites for their own burials, unaware of the original builder's fate. The disappearance of the temple culture is one of archaeology's most haunting cold cases, and several compelling theories attempt to piece together what happened. One of the most persuasive points to an environmental collapse, the very success of their society may have sown the seeds of its downfall. Generations of intensive agriculture and the constant demand for timber to fuel fires, build sledges, and perhaps even for construction could have stripped the islands of their fragile tree cover. Without roots to hold the thin soil in place, rains would have washed the precious farmland into the sea, a process called erosion. A series of poor harvests could have spiraled into widespread hardship, shaking the people's faith in the very spiritual order that held their world together. Other researchers point to a possible climatic shift, a prolonged drought that no amount of solar alignment could predict or prevent. The islands are vulnerable, and a sustained period of aridity would have placed unbearable stress on their water supplies and crops. There is also a social theory which wonders if the theocratic system itself became a victim of its own weight. After 1,000 years, the endless cycle of temple maintenance, ritual obligation, and resource dedication to the priestly class may have grown too burdensome for the common people. What if a growing sense of apathy, or even a quiet revolt against the old spiritual order, caused the social contract to unravel from within? Intriguingly, the very end of this period shows a faint but chilling shift in the archaeological record. At the Tarxien site, evidence suggests a temporary breakdown of the long-standing peace. Researchers note signs of conflict, including damage to some of the sacred figures and a brief, stark departure from the culture's deeply ingrained norms. This fleeting resurgence of violence hints at a period of desperation or social fracture in the final days. Whatever the precise catalyst, the outcome was the same. A vibrant, unique, and peaceful civilization simply faded from history, leaving behind only its stones and its mysteries. This vanishing act adds a profound layer of poignancy to their story. It reminds us that no society, no matter how spiritually attuned or ingeniously engineered, exists in a vacuum. They are part of a delicate web of environment, resources, and social cohesion. The silent temples of Malta stand as a dual monument to the breathtaking heights of human creativity and cooperation, and to the sobering truth of our shared fragility, a lesson carved in limestone that resonates across the ages. For centuries, the great stones were simply part of the landscape, their true story buried under soil and local legend. To the farmers of Malta and Gozo, these sprawling ruins were known as Ġgantija, the Giant's Tower, a place explained by folklore as the work of a giantess who built them while nursing her child. Other sites were used as convenient sheep pens or quarries for later building projects, their sacred origins utterly forgotten. The civilization that built them had vanished so completely that even its memory was erased, leaving only the silent, puzzling stones. The systematic rescue of this lost world began in earnest in the 19th century, as the new science of archaeology started to take shape. A pivotal figure in this story is Sir Themistocles Zammit, a Maltese doctor and scholar. In 1915, he began excavations at the Tarxien site, which had been discovered by farmers years earlier. His methods, while careful for their time, were of their era, focused on uncovering structures and artifacts, but with less attention to the subtle layers of soil that tell a story of daily life. Despite these limitations, his work was revolutionary. It pulled the temples from the realm of myth into the light of historical study, revealing the staggering artistry of the spiral carvings and the colossal statue of the goddess for the first time in millennia. The 20th century brought a new standard of precision to the islands. Archaeologists like David Trump, working in the 1960s and beyond, employed more meticulous techniques, carefully sifting through deposits to establish a clearer timeline through radiocarbon dating. His work at sites like Scorba helped define the distinct phases of the temple period, separating the layers of a 1,000-year civilization from the later Bronze Age arrivals who followed. This painstaking scholarship transformed the temples from isolated curiosities into chapters of a coherent, if mysterious, human narrative. The ultimate recognition of their global value came in 1980, when the Ġgantija temples on Gozo were inscribed as a UNESCO World Heritage Site, a status later extended to include Hagar, Mnajdra, Tarxien, and the Hypogeum. This designation was more than an honor. It was a statement that these monuments belong not just to Malta, but to all of humanity as a foundational part of our shared heritage. Their journey from local farmers' field to World Heritage Site is a profound reminder of how our understanding of the past evolves, and how a forgotten whisper from the Neolithic age can rise again to claim its rightful place as a cornerstone of the human story. The legacy of these stones now faces a quiet, relentless threat of its own. The very environment that shaped this civilization, the sun, sea, and wind, has become an agent of decay in our modern age. The soft, beautiful Globigerina limestone used at sites like Hagar is especially vulnerable. It is a stone that literally breathes, absorbing moisture from the air. Today, that moisture carries microscopic pollutants from industry and traffic, acids that slowly eat away at the carved spirals and smooth walls. Salt crystals, born on the sea winds, work their way into the porous rock, expanding and contracting with changes in temperature and humidity, causing the surface to flake and crumble like ancient parchment. Even the touch of countless hands, the vibration of footsteps, and the subtle changes in humidity from a crowd of visitors exert a cumulative, physical pressure on structures that have stood for 50 centuries. The preservation of this heritage has become a sophisticated science and a profound ethical dilemma. To combat the elements, massive, tent-like shelters now arch over Hagar and Mnajdra. These are controversial structures, altering the visual relationship between the temples and the sky they were built to honor. Yet they are a necessary compromise, a protective shield that filters harmful ultraviolet rays and deflects the worst of the acidic rain, creating a more stable microclimate around the ancient stones. Visitor access is carefully managed, with walkways that guide the flow of people and limit physical contact. Behind the scenes, scientists employ laser scanning and 3D modeling to monitor the most minute signs of erosion, creating a digital record of every crack and contour. This constant vigilance represents a new chapter in the story of the temples, a global commitment to stewardship. It forces us to ask difficult questions about balance. How do we protect the authenticity of a place while still allowing people to experience its power? Is a temple under a shelter still the same temple? These efforts acknowledge that these are not just Maltese treasures, but chapters from humanity's earliest book, and we hold a collective responsibility to ensure their pages are not lost. The work of conservation is a silent promise to the future, a vow that the whispers from these stones will not be drowned out by the noise of our own time. The scale of their ambition becomes even clearer when we place them on a global timeline. While the Great Pyramid of Giza was rising in Egypt around 2500 BCE, the last stones of Malta's temples were already 1,000 years old, their builders long vanished into silence. This staggering head start reframes our entire understanding of monumental architecture. These were not just contemporaries of other ancient wonders. They were the pioneers, the original blueprint for what human societies could achieve in stone. But the comparison reveals something even more fascinating than mere age. It highlights a profound divergence in purpose. The pyramids of Egypt were, at their core, magnificent tombs, sealed monuments to a single divine king, designed to project royal power into eternity and safeguard a journey to the afterlife. The Maltese temples, in stark contrast, show no evidence of being dedicated to any single ruler. They were public, communal spaces built by and for an entire society. Their open, cloverleaf plans suggest spaces where people gathered, moved, and participated in rituals together. This was architecture for the living community, not for a solitary god-king in death. Architecturally, they stand apart as a unique language in stone. Across the channel in what is now Britain, the early phases of Stonehenge, which would not reach its iconic form for another 1,000 years, revolved around circular patterns and astronomical alignments using massive, imported bluestones. In Brittany, the famous rows of Karnak stretch across the landscape in awe-inspiring linear processions. The Maltese builders chose neither the circle nor the line. They invented their own organic form, the curved, lobed temple that seems to grow from the ground like a stone flower. Their use of corbelled roofing to create enclosed, domed spaces was a revolutionary leap, creating true interior rooms where others were building open-air enclosures. This was not a crude first attempt at a style others would perfect. It was a fully realized and distinct architectural tradition that reached its zenith in complete isolation. This isolation is the final, critical piece of the puzzle. The culture of the Maltese Islands developed its extraordinary vision with little evidence of direct outside influence or conquest. They were not emulating a grander neighbor, they were inventing a grander vision from scratch. This makes their achievement a powerful case study in the diverse paths of human ingenuity. Similar underlying impulses, the drive to mark sacred time, to honor cosmic forces, and to build spaces that transcend the everyday, led to wildly different monumental expressions around the world. In Egypt, it produced the soaring, geometric tomb. In Britain, the vast celestial calendar of stone. In Malta, it yielded the intimate, womb-like temple complex, a center for community ritual that wove together art, astronomy, and a deep reverence for the cycles of life. Their story reminds us that human creativity is not a single, linear march of progress, but a brilliant, branching tree, with the silent temples of Malta representing one of its most original and mysterious early blossoms. The life-giving pulse of this civilization may have flowed not just from the sun, but from something even more precious on their arid islands, water. In a landscape where rain is scarce and the summer sun relentless, every spring and seep would have been a sacred gift. This elemental necessity appears to have been woven directly into their spiritual practice, leading some researchers to propose the existence of a sophisticated water cult. Astroarchaeologist Michael Hoskin and others point to compelling physical evidence scattered across the temple sites. Certain complexes were strategically placed near known springs, suggesting their location was chosen not just for celestial alignment, but for access to this vital resource. Within the temples themselves, archaeologists have uncovered carefully carved channels and shallow basins cut into the stone floors. These features were not for drainage. Their placement and design indicate a ceremonial purpose. They could have been used for ritual ablutions, a symbolic washing of hands or sacred objects before entering the presence of the divine. Or they may have held offerings of water itself, the most valuable liquid or perhaps milk from their herds, poured as a libation to the earth. This practice transforms a simple architectural detail into a profound act of communion, a tangible gift given in hope of continued abundance. The deepest connection lies in the Hypogeum, where, at its lowest level, a natural perennial water source seeps from the rock. This was not an accident. The builders knowingly excavated down to this point, incorporating the living water into the very foundation of their underworld sanctuary. In that echoing darkness, the quiet drip of water would have been a powerful sound, a constant reminder of the hidden, subterranean source that sustained life above. Viewing their rituals through this lens adds a vital, elemental layer to our understanding. Their ceremonies were not abstract, they were intimately tied to the survival of the community. The spiral carvings may have symbolized flowing water as much as the cycles of the sun. The rounded temple chambers could evoke not only womb-like spaces but also wells or springs. Fertility rites, so central to their likely goddess-centered beliefs, would have been inseparable from prayers for rain and the protection of their water sources. Every libation poured, every channel filled, was a direct conversation with the forces that held their world in balance, a sacred technology aimed at ensuring the literal and spiritual nourishment of their people. This precise resonance points to a deliberate design, a sacred technology built from sound and stone. The oracle room is no ordinary cave. Its oval shape, domed ceiling, and the specific curvature of its walls were painstakingly carved to function as an acoustic instrument. When a voice chants at the right pitch, the sound does not simply bounce, it blooms. The entire space begins to hum, a deep vibration you feel in your chest and through the soles of your feet. Modern acoustic tests have measured this phenomenon, revealing the chamber is tuned to a specific frequency, around 110 Hz. This is not a random number. Research into sound and human consciousness suggests this particular low frequency can directly influence brainwave patterns. It is associated with a shift away from the busy, analytical state of normal waking thought and toward a more receptive, meditative, or even trance-like awareness. In the flickering darkness of the Hypogeum, lit only by the glow of oil lamps, this effect would have been overwhelming. A ritual leader's chant or the steady beat of a drum would not just be heard, it would become a physical force, washing over participants and altering their perception of reality. The architecture itself was actively shaping the ritual experience. This discovery fundamentally changes how we understand these spaces. They were not silent, empty monuments to be looked at. They were dynamic, immersive environments to be felt and experienced from within. Sound was a tool as vital as the flint chisel or the stone ball bearing. It was the medium through which the community could collectively cross a threshold, using the vibration of their own voices, amplified and sanctified by the stone, to connect with what they believed lay beyond the visible world. The Hypogeum becomes a resonance chamber for the spirit, proving that 5,000 years ago, these builders understood the power of their environment to touch the human mind in profound and intentional ways. While the temples stand as monuments of faith, the islands hold a second, sprawling mystery etched directly into the living rock. Across the limestone plateaus of Malta and Gozo, a vast network of strange, parallel grooves cuts through the landscape, known simply as the Ruts. These are not faint scratches but deep, well-defined channels, often running in perfectly parallel pairs for dozens of meters before vanishing abruptly at a cliff edge or disappearing beneath the modern sea. They crisscross in chaotic junctions, weave up and down slopes with no regard for the easiest path, and present a puzzle that is both utterly mundane and profoundly baffling. Unlike the deliberate artistry of the temples, the ruts feel functional, accidental, the scars of some relentless, everyday activity. But what activity? And who was responsible? The debate over their origin is one of the most enduring in Maltese archaeology. Their age is incredibly difficult to pin down, as they are carved directly into bedrock and contain no datable material. They could be Neolithic, contemporary with the temple builders, or they could date from the Bronze Age, the Phoenician period, or even later. This uncertainty opens the door to a fascinating range of theories. The most persistent idea connects them directly to the temple construction, Imagine heavy sledges laden with multi-ton limestone blocks being dragged along the same path year after year, decade after decade. The constant friction of wood and rope on stone, perhaps aided by those spherical stone bearings, could have gradually worn these deep, parallel ruts into the soft limestone. This theory paints a picture of a vast, island-wide logistics network, with these tracks serving as the highways that delivered sacred stone from quarry to construction site. Yet problems arise with this practical explanation. Many ruts lead directly off cliffs into the sea, or end abruptly at what would have been steep drop-offs even 5,000 years ago, making them illogical transport routes. Other ruts are cut so deeply and so close together that a sledge of any reasonable width could not have fit between them. This has led to alternative proposals. Perhaps they were part of an ingenious irrigation system, channels designed to capture and direct precious rainwater to fields or storage cisterns. Or more creatively, some researchers have suggested they formed part of a primitive railway with a fixed cart running in the grooves pulled by people or animals. The truth is, no single theory perfectly fits the chaotic, widespread evidence. Their possible connection to the temple culture, while tantalizing, remains unproven. But if they are from that same distant epoch, they suggest something staggering. They imply that the sacred centers of above Ġgantija or Tarxien were not isolated sanctuaries, but the beating hearts of a far more complex and organized society than we have yet grasped. The temples would have been the focal point of a hive of constant activity, fed by this sprawling network of tracks that connected quarries, farmlands, and coastal landing sites. The cart ruts transform our mental image from a few quiet, ritual sites to an entire landscape humming with purpose, all dedicated to sustaining the spiritual vision at its core. They are the ghostly imprint of an entire civilization's daily labor, a mundane mystery that, if solved, might tell us more about how they lived than any silent, sacred stone ever could. The silent stones hold their age as closely as their secrets, but science has given them a voice. To move beyond the awe of their presence and into the solid ground of history, researchers turned to a revolutionary tool, radiocarbon dating. This technique does not date the stone itself, but the tiny fragments of life left behind by the builders, charcoal from their fires, animal bones from their meals, and seeds from their last offerings, all trapped in the construction layers. When analyzed, these organic whispers told a consistent, staggering story. The great building phases across Malta and Gozo unfolded between 3,600 and 2,500 before the Common Era. This was not a guess but a measurable fact, repeated and verified at site after site. To further anchor this timeline, scientists employed another method, thermoluminescence dating, on the countless pottery shards found among the ruins. This process measures the minute amount of radiation absorbed by fired clay since it was last heated, acting as a clock reset with every use of a cooking pot or lamp. The results from the pottery aligned perfectly with the radiocarbon dates, creating an unshakable chronological framework. This scientific evidence is the bedrock upon which all modern understanding rests. It is what definitively transforms a feeling of deep antiquity into a historical reality, placing the climax of Malta's temple culture over 1,000 years before the first stones of the Great Pyramid of Giza were laid around 2580 BC. That head start is not a matter of vague legend, but of physics and chemistry. The precision of these methods allows us to place these temples with confidence on the vast map of human achievement, identifying them not as mysterious outliers, but as the true pioneers of monumental stone architecture in the Western world. Every interpretation of their society, from their peaceful theocracy to their celestial alignments, is built upon this firm foundation of dates. It means that when we walk through the curved chambers of above Ġgantija, we are walking through a space that felt ancient to the pyramid builders themselves, a realization that forever reshapes our perception of the ancient past. Long after the last ritual fires had gone cold, the stones refused to be forgotten. Without a written history to explain their origins, the people of Malta and Gozo wove their own stories, a rich tapestry of folklore that clothed the silent ruins in meaning. The most famous of these tales surrounds the Ġgantija dot above Ġgantija complex itself. For centuries, locals knew it as the work of a giantess named Sansuna. According to the legend, Sansuna, a being of immense strength and stature, built the towering walls single-handedly. She would carry the massive stones balanced on her head, all while cradling her infant child, moving with a supernatural grace that defied the logic of ordinary human effort. This story is a beautiful piece of folk logic, a perfect metaphor for the seemingly impossible task the ruins represent. To a farmer tilling the soil beside these colossal blocks, no ordinary person could have placed them there, so the builders must have been something more than human. The giantess myth transforms an archaeological mystery into a relatable narrative of maternal power and divine creation, embedding the temple into the living culture of the island. Other legends sought different anchors. Some later tales, influenced by Christianity, wove the temples into biblical lore, suggesting they were built by fleeing giants after the Great Flood, or even attributing them to saints and hermits of the early church. These were not attempts at deception, but acts of interpretation. Each generation looked upon these awe-inspiring forms and asked the same fundamental question we ask today: who built this and why? In the absence of scientific answers, the human mind does what it has always done: it creates a story. This oral tradition served as a vital thread of cultural memory, a way of keeping the stones relevant and integrated into the community's identity long after their original purpose was lost. While these legends are not historical records, they are invaluable in their own right. They testify to the profound psychological impact the architecture had and continues to have on those who live in its shadow. The folklore is evidence that the temples never ceased to communicate. They spoke a wordless language of scale and mystery that compelled every era to stop, wonder, and invent a reason for their existence. This enduring need to explain them kept their memory alive through millennia, acting as a fragile bridge across time until the careful hands of archaeology could begin to uncover a different, yet equally wondrous truth. The very stones themselves are a product of their place, shaped as much by geography as by faith. Malta is not a sprawling continent, but a compact archipelago of small islands, a world in miniature surrounded by the vast blue expanse of the Mediterranean. This isolation was not a barrier but a crucible. With limited land and finite resources, every decision carried immense weight. There was no empty frontier to expand into, no easy escape from social tensions. This forced a profound interdependence, a necessity for cooperation that likely forged the incredibly tight-knit society capable of those multi-generational temple projects. Innovation here couldn't be outward-looking, focused on trade or conquest. It had to be directed inward, channeled into the spiritual and social fabric of the community itself. The surrounding sea, while a connector for ideas, also provided a natural moat. For over 1,000 years, the islands show no signs of fortification or evidence of large-scale conflict. This prolonged peace, this freedom from the constant threat of invasion that plagued the continental mainland, was a priceless gift. It granted the temple culture something rare in the ancient world: centuries of uninterrupted cultural development. Without the need to pour their energy and resources into walls and weapons, they could invest everything into a different kind of monument, one dedicated not to fear but to wonder. Their architecture became an expression of this profound security, a confident outward projection of an inner world. The environment itself became a partner in their vision. The Mediterranean climate blessed the islands with long stretches of clear, stable skies, especially during the critical planting and harvest seasons. This was the perfect natural observatory. Night after night, season after season, the starry dome was a readable text, and the sun's path was a reliable, trackable journey. The consistent visibility allowed for the patient, cumulative observation necessary to achieve the precise alignments we see at Mnajdra. They didn't have to fight through cloud cover or guess through fog. The heavens were a clear, open book laid before them. In this sense, the Maltese Islands functioned as a kind of Neolithic laboratory, isolated and protected, with a stable climate and a bounded landscape. A unique set of cultural conditions could incubate. Ideas about community, cosmology, and the divine were allowed to mix and evolve without significant outside disruption, fermenting into something entirely distinct. The result was a cultural expression of remarkable purity and concentration. On the continents, cultural influences bleed, overlap, and compete. In Malta, they distilled. This is why their temple architecture looks like nothing else. It is the product of a long, quiet conversation a society had with itself, with its gods, and with its island home, amplified over 1,000 years and finally expressed in a monumental form of breathtaking specificity. Their story is a powerful testament to how boundaries, whether of water or of land, can sometimes create the very conditions needed for a civilization to find its own, utterly unique voice. This sophisticated spiritual system reveals a mind that saw the universe as an interconnected whole. The temples were not separate from the world of farming, family, or the changing seasons. They were the central mechanism that made sense of it all. The evidence points to a religion far more complex than a vague reverence for natural forces. This was a structured belief system with its own sacred calendar, maintained by a specialized class of priests who could read the sun's language. It had its own elaborate rituals, from the pouring of libations in carved channels to the processions that likely moved through the curved passages. It possessed a rich symbolic vocabulary of spirals and animal forms, and it centered on powerful, anthropomorphic figures like the Mother Goddess, who embodied the very principle of regeneration. To label this as primitive animism is to miss the profound coherence on display. The sheer scale of the architectural investment is the ultimate testament to its power. A society does not dedicate centuries of labor to a temporary idea. They built in stone because they believed they were building for eternity, creating a permanent, physical intersection between their community and the cosmic order they revered. These structures were designed as eternal gateways, fixed points where humanity could reliably reach out and touch the divine. This understanding forces us to discard outdated notions of prehistoric spirituality as a simple, fearful reaction to a chaotic world. Instead, we see a confident, proactive philosophy, a system of meaning so compelling it could coordinate the lives of thousands across generations. It was a world capable of inspiring not just fear, but awe, devotion, and a breathtaking commitment to beauty. The genius of their engineering and art was not separate from their faith. It was the direct and magnificent expression of it. Their profound isolation makes the question of their influence a haunting one. Did the spark that ignited in Malta ever travel beyond the islands, or did it simply burn out, leaving no embers for others to carry forward? Archaeologically speaking, there is no clear, direct line of transmission. The society appears to have dissolved in place, its unique cultural package never exported as a whole. The great silence that followed their collapse suggests a flame that was utterly extinguished, not passed to a new torchbearer. Yet ideas, especially powerful ones, have a way of traveling on the currents of human contact. While the temple culture itself did not spread, some of its underlying concepts may have drifted across the Mediterranean over centuries. The mesmerizing spiral motif, so central to their sacred art, is a powerful symbol that appears independently in many ancient cultures, from Ireland to Mesopotamia. But its particularly vivid and sophisticated expression in Malta could have been seen by later seafarers like the early Minoans or Mycenaeans who plied these waters. These visitors might have encountered the abandoned, awe-inspiring ruins and carried back not a blueprint but an idea, a seed of inspiration about what was possible with stone and collective will. Some architectural historians note a faint, intriguing echo in the later circular tombs of Mycenaean Greece, the tholos tombs with their corbelled domes. This technique of stepping stones inward to create a roof was mastered in Malta over 1,000 years prior. It is unlikely to be a coincidence, but rather a distant reverberation of a building principle that slowly diffused across the sea, losing its original sacred context but retaining its structural genius. The true legacy of the Maltese builders, therefore, is not one of direct cultural fatherhood, but of profound, silent precedent. They stand as humanity's original proof of concept. They demonstrated, long before anyone else in their part of the world, that a settled community could organize itself not for war, but for a monumental spiritual vision. They proved that stones could be made to speak of the cosmos, that architecture could be a calendar, and that a society could find its greatest strength in a shared pursuit of meaning. This realization that such achievement was possible becomes a kind of invisible inheritance for all who came after. When the pyramid builders of Egypt looked to the horizon, or the circle builders of Britain looked to the stars, they were answering the same fundamental human call that the Maltese had answered first. The temples of Malta are a reminder that the drive to build significance into the landscape, to mark our place in the universe with something permanent and beautiful, is a deep, recurring strand of the human story. Their legacy is not a lineage we can trace in artifacts, but a timeless echo of potential, a whisper from the deep past that says, "Look what can be done." Even with all we have uncovered, the silent stones guard their deepest secrets with an unyielding patience. The grand narrative of their construction and collapse is now broadly understood, yet the intimate details of their daily spiritual life remain tantalizingly out of reach. We can walk through their sacred spaces, but we cannot hear the chants that filled them. We can see the altars, but we do not know the exact words spoken over them. The precise nature of the rituals performed inside these curved chambers is a matter of informed speculation, pieced together from the channels cut for libations, the altars with flint blades, and the resonant acoustics designed to alter consciousness. Were they ceremonies of renewal tied to the solstice light, rites of passage for the young, communal feasts honoring the mother goddess? The architecture sets the stage, but the performance itself is lost to time. Equally elusive is the sound of their world. What language did these builders speak? It was a tongue that left no written record, not a single symbol that can be definitively called a word. All we have are the abstract spirals and animal carvings, a visual language that likely conveyed sacred concepts but not everyday speech. Their voice is a complete blank in history, a silence that makes their intellectual achievements all the more remarkable. They coordinated vast projects, tracked celestial cycles, and developed a complex theology, all through oral tradition and memory alone. The loss of their language is a profound rupture, separating us from their jokes, their stories, their names for each other, and the very terms they used to describe the gods they built for. Another quiet absence speaks volumes. In an art rich with bulls, goats, and pigs, there is a startling lack of imagery depicting the sea. For a people living on small islands in the heart of the Mediterranean, surrounded by a teeming source of food and the great highway connecting them to a wider world, the ocean is conspicuously missing from their sacred iconography. This could suggest that their identity was fiercely land-based, rooted in agriculture and animal husbandry, with the sea viewed as a boundary or a backdrop rather than a central spiritual force. Or perhaps the sea was so ever-present, so fundamental, that it required no depiction, existing instead as the unseen stage upon which their entire world was set. Its absence is a puzzle that reminds us how differently ancient cultures could perceive their own environment. The exact mechanics of their society also hover just beyond our grasp. We infer a peaceful, theocratic structure from the lack of weapons and the scale of communal labor, but the specifics are unclear. How was authority truly organized? Was there a single high priest or a council of elders? How were labor duties assigned across the islands? How did they resolve disputes or manage resources without the hierarchies we associate with early states? Their social blueprint, so effective for a millennium, remains a compelling silhouette. Yet these open questions are not failures of archaeology, they are its lifeblood. They are invitations written in stone and soil for future generations to accept. The story is not finished. New technologies promise to peer deeper into the mystery without disturbing a single stone. Ground-penetrating radar and other remote sensing techniques may one day reveal undiscovered chambers hidden beneath the floors of known temples, or even entirely new complexes waiting under farmers' fields. Advanced residue analysis on pottery could finally identify the exact substances used in those libation channels. Each unanswered question is a door left ajar, ensuring that the temples of Malta remain a living field of inquiry, not a closed museum exhibit. This enduring mystery is the final, beautiful lesson of these ancient islands, a civilization that mastered stone, sky, and sound 5,000 years ago continues to teach us today. It teaches that human history is not a simple puzzle to be solved, but an endless conversation between the past and the present. Every answer we uncover, from the purpose of the cart ruts to the meaning of the sleeping lady, does not end the discussion. It simply reveals new, deeper questions about creativity, community, and our shared need to find meaning in the universe. The temples stand not as dead ruins, but as active partners in discovery, forever whispering that there is still more to learn about who we are and who we once were. The megalithic temples of Malta are a profound statement from the dawn of civilization. These stones are not a ruin, they are a conversation, one that began over 5,000 years ago and continues to speak to us today. They tell a story not of conquest, but of community, not of fear, but of a deep, abiding faith that moved literal mountains. A peaceful, devout, and brilliantly innovative people looked to the stars, listened to the earth, and carved their understanding of the universe into the very bedrock of their island home. Their legacy is a double-edged wonder. It challenges our historical timelines, placing monumental achievement in an era we often label as primitive. It humbles any modern arrogance, reminding us that true innovation flourishes not just with advanced tools, but with a unified purpose and a sacred vision. These silent, curved chambers stand as eternal proof of what human cooperation can achieve when directed toward a meaning greater than any single lifetime. As we leave these stones behind, let them serve as a permanent landmark in our shared memory. They are a testament to the depths of our history, a whisper from a time before written words, urging us to remember the endless human capacity for wonder, for creation, and for looking at the night sky with a sense of profound connection. If this journey into a forgotten chapter of prehistory resonated with you, consider subscribing for more explorations into the world's greatest mysteries. We would love to hear your thoughts on these enigmatic temples in the comments below.